Welcome back. I have a confession to make. I like to indulge in Schadenfreude from time to time, and one of the ways that I get to really revel in our shared humanity is reading the Darwin Awards. So ask me forgiveness before I tell this story first. I was really touched about a story from 1995. A particularly daring daredevil named Robert decided to attempt something no one had ever done before: to ride his jet ski off Niagara Falls. Now, that might seem completely stupid, but Robert had done some planning. He'd fitted his jet ski with a rocket booster, and he was carrying a parachute. The idea was to fire the booster as he hit the falls and open the parachute at the apex of his flight and then drift down to safety in the water below. Unfortunately, Robert had failed to factor in one crucial element: the fact that water makes things wet. As he hurtled toward the falls and pressed the button, his utterly soaked rocket booster failed to ignite. Plummeting off the edge, he tried his parachute, but it wasn't waterproof, and it also failed to deploy. I'd like to talk about wisdom. Prajna is referred to as wisdom or insight in our practice. And insight into the nature of reality is what it's all about: discriminating knowledge, intuitive apprehension, something that Robert was missing in his final adventure. I'm so sorry, Robert. What I'd like to talk about is how wisdom is one of the most precious qualities you can cultivate in your life. I'd also like to talk about what gets in the way of wisdom, and a topic that's fascinated me for a long time: the anatomy of an insight. What is an insight? How does it happen? And then finally, to talk a little bit about wisdom and compassion and how they work together in practice, how they work together in your life. I think it's safe to say that there is this inextricable connection between wisdom and suffering. And wisdom tends to come out of the understanding of suffering, at least through this lens of Buddhist psychology. I've been reflecting on how could I illustrate that. And there's no better story I can think of than a classic story that was told from the Buddha's day of a young woman who lost her son. Her son died very, very young. She was so beside herself that she wandered from house to house with her dead son in her arms, asking for medicine to bring him back to life. And she had heard of the Buddha and his teachings, went to the Buddha and said, "You are this wise man that everyone has told me about. Bring my son back to life." The Buddha said, "I can't do that. But if you can find someone who has not lost someone that they love, come back to me and I'll bring your son back to life." This gave her tremendous hope and set her off on this initiative to travel from household to household to household to find someone who had never lost anyone that they loved in their life. As you can imagine, in her travels of hearing story after story of heartbreaking loss, she began to realize this truth of impermanence. And that awareness of suffering cultivated a very deep and profound quality of wisdom. And I'm sure you know people who have gone through tremendous loss and tremendous suffering and come through. And I imagine you have as well. And so it's an interesting question. In your life right now, who do you think of as like the wisest person that you know? Who comes to mind? And what are the characteristics of this person you consider to be wise? And what I would suggest is that there's a relationship that they have to suffering, to the growth and the wisdom that comes from turning toward suffering. And I think we can safely say that wisdom is the capacity to see what's true, seeing reality, seeing it in the nature of change, the nature of suffering, the nature of the self. And I believe that this is what our journey is all about. It's all about cultivating wisdom. It's all about seeing into the nature of reality. Whenever I do that, my life is tremendously, tremendously enhanced. When I get angry with our dog, who's has the attention span of a squirrel on caffeine, and I remember that her time here is limited, suddenly my relationship has shifted. When we recognize impermanence, for example, it changes the whole frame of our life. When you realize that everyone that you love, everyone you care for, is destined to not be here in no particular order, it's a state changer, a profound, profound state changer. And so we're drawn to cultivating wisdom and insight. And just want to honor that you're here, I'm here. This call to practice is so interesting, compelling, and challenging. We're all on this journey, and just always brings me back to the whole analogy of the hero's journey. Something has called you to pay closer attention to this life. And as soon as you are called on your journey, you are beset with obstacles and challenges. And as we move through those challenges, we see more and more clearly into the nature of reality itself. And I have no doubt that in your practice, as you have explored what it means to cultivate more wholesome states, you have reflected on your own generosity or lack thereof, of your moral behavior, your virtue in life, of your capacity to let go of what doesn't serve you in the deepest way. These are all elements of cultivating more wisdom and more insight in your life. It's also interesting how wisdom is related to letting go, about letting go of distractions to help you see more clearly. And a simple analogy, which I've shared a lot, it's classic. If you take a glass of muddy water and you set it on a counter and just let it be, over time the sediment falls and the water becomes clear. Every time that you sit with the intention to be present, you automatically become aware of how stirred up the water is, and over time that begins to settle. In that same way, as you keep refining what's most important in your life, you become more aware of what's getting in the way, what the distractions are. And the more you can let those settle, the more you naturally begin to see more and more clearly into the nature of reality itself. So it opens up this really interesting question. What gets in the way? How do we get so confused in this life? Well, back to the Darwin Awards. This is from 2007. A patient was rushed into the hospital, needing a surgeon to reattach the tips of his fingers to his left hand. While taking the patient's history, it was found that this bright idea came to him of holding his lawnmower sideways and applying it to his hedge. He was holding the mower deck, trimming the hedge. Things were going well until the weight of the mower got to be a bit much. He readjusted his grip on the mower deck, and that's when the blade hit him. So when the reconstructive plastic surgeon was almost finished with this incredibly complex job of sewing the patient's hand back together, another patient came in with the same injury. On questioning him, it was found that he too had been using his mower to trim his hedge. Apparently, he lived right near the first patient. He saw his neighbor trimming his hedge with the mower and thought, what a good idea. So, what gets in the way of wisdom? So another question for you. If you might want to close your eyes. You don't have to. Just a very quick little inquiry here. When you think of someone who's not wise, who comes into mind? Just take a few moments. Someone who you consider not wise. And what characteristics do they exhibit? When I reflect on what gets in the way, I think the times when I forget that things are constantly changing, when I forget that holding on results in rope burn, when I get utterly attached to the sense of I and mine, when I forget that I don't have to believe every thought is true. And it's interesting how in Sanskrit, if you look at Sanskrit words, if there's a letter before the word that starts with an A, it means not that. So avidya is not knowledge or not wisdom. Ahimsa or ahimsa is not violent. Aparigraha is not clinging. Ashteya is not stealing. It's the absence of. And that becomes really, really interesting because how do we sense this realm of wisdom when we hear about the field of infinite possibility, the quantum field of consciousness? It's the absence of lots of things. The absence of ignorance, the absence of clinging, the absence of greed, the absence of hatred, the absence of confusion. So to cultivate a greater sense of wisdom, we have to examine our own lives, to really acknowledge what's between me and this realm of wisdom and insight. I love this story about Mahatma Gandhi. Someone in his entourage said, I'd like you to speak to my young son. He's eating too much sugar. It's not good for him. Gandhi said, come back in 2 weeks. The woman came back with her son in 2 weeks. And Gandhi sat down with him and said, I understand you're eating a lot of sugar and it's really not that good for you. And you might want to consider, eating less. Your mother has some really good wisdom to share with you here. Afterward, the woman said, so you asked me to come by in 2 weeks. Why did you ask me to wait that long? And Gandhi said, well, I was eating sweets. That level of self-awareness is all part of scrupulously looking at what's between you and being more aware. And what I find is when you focus on what's true, you begin to notice everything that's in the way. I once got really inspired by the principle of satya, of truth, I thought, from now on, I'm going to tell the truth. I just took it on as a practice, and I immediately noticed how I lie all the time. So what gets in the way of wisdom and insight? Well, according to this lens of Buddhist psychology, there are three elements, and sometimes they're referred to as the three poisons of the mind, of greed, hatred, and delusion. Greed and craving leads us to do something for short-term pleasure, knowing it's long-term pain. If you've ever said or you've ever heard anyone say, I shouldn't, but I'm going to have that second piece of cake, or whatever it may be. Hatred and aversion. Holding someone separate. Closing yourself off from possibility. We see this so clearly now in the polarization in our country, the oppression of non-dominant cultures, the prejudice that gets more and more baked into our consciousness. The third is interesting. The third is delusion or confusion. It's believing something's true when it's not, or believing something isn't true when it is. The best example I can think of was there's a story of a Japanese soldier on an island after World War II. Years and years and years went by. He thought that the war was still going on. And he was living like a kind of guerrilla warfare on this island in the Pacific. And finally, they found his commanding officer many, many, many years later, was able to reach out to him, tell him it was over. And it opens up this really interesting question. What are you believing that isn't true? Or what are you not believing that is true? A quick internet search revealed some of the things we believe that aren't true. Toads give you warts. If you're believing that, it's not true. You only use 10% of your brain. Not really. If you swim right after you eat, you'll die. Maybe you were told that one. Napoleon was short. Allegedly he was 5'2". Well, he was 5'7", which is kind of average. And this one is so offensive. We have to eradicate this belief that toilets flush in different directions in different hemispheres. Sorry, it's just not true. So the challenge in spiritual practice is to see more clearly. That's our biggest practice, to see through this lens of craving, of wanting, to see through this lens of hatred and aversion, to see through the lens of confusion and delusion. Which leads me to one of the most awful prayers there is that's kind of informed by yoga philosophy. This prayer says the following: Lord, burn what can be burned, drown what can be drowned, cut what can be cut. For I want to know what it is that cannot be burned, cannot be drowned, and cannot be cut. That's brutal. And it's what we've signed up for. So how much do you want to be awake? How badly do you want to cultivate wisdom? How willing are you to open yourself to have what can be burned, burned? Hafiz offers the following: Love wants to reach out and manhandle us, break all our teacup talk of God. If you had the courage and could give the beloved his choice, some nights he would just drag you around the room by your hair, ripping from your grip all the toys in this world that bring you no joy. Love sometimes gets tired of speaking sweetly and wants to rip to shreds all your erroneous notions of truth that make you fight within yourself and with others. causing the world to weep on too many fine days. God wants to manhandle us, lock us inside a tiny room with himself, and practice his drop kick. The beloved sometimes wants to do us a great favor, hold us upside down and shake all the nonsense out. But when we hear he's such in a playful, drunken mood, most everyone I know quickly packs their bags and hightails it out of town. As Jack Nicholson famously said, you can't handle the truth. Can we? Can we handle the truth? How do we see more clearly? How do we see through the veil of our own ignorance? I'm fascinated by this relationship between meditation and intuition. And I've led retreats on this a lot. As far as I can tell, you cannot make intuition happen, but you can cultivate an optimal space for it to happen. When you shift your point of view, when you shift your sense of identity, when you shift your consciousness, there's the possibility of seeing more clearly. As Einstein said, no problem was ever solved in the same consciousness that created it. Anytime you need a shift, you have to shift your consciousness. Otherwise, as one of my teachers said, trying to figure out your problems with the mind is like trying to put out a fire with gasoline. It just doesn't work. So how do we shift our identity? How do we shift our consciousness? Lots of different ways. There was a poet who famously said, sometimes it's helpful to take the 3,000-year view. And when I try that, and you might have to try it right now, if you just take your life and your top 3 issues and think of the 3,000-year view. Things shift a little bit. It's a classic little reflection. You may have done this one before. It's been around for a long time, but it can be really helpful. If you like, you can close your eyes. We're going to take about 3 minutes for this. You might take 3 slow, deep breaths. Relaxing on the out breath. And you might bring into mind, let's just say a conflict, a personal conflict you might have with someone. And take a few moments to kind of go through the files. There's some conflict where you feel maybe misunderstood, maybe you feel judged or you're judging someone. You have different points of view that clash. With the next few breaths, just bring into mind. And if no issue comes to mind, you can make something up just to kind of try this on. And when you have this in mind, take a few moments to step into it, draw it a little bit closer. Can you visualize the other person? Imagine you're in the same room together. Can you recall the words or tone of voice? And now can you begin to sense, what does this conflict, this relationship feel like on the inside? You might just sense through the midline, the core of your body. What does it feel like to feel separate from this person? Can you locate that feeling? And now to amplify this a little bit, when you might maybe exaggerate the feeling, exaggerate the conflict, how how big could that get? What does that feel like inside? Is there a particular emotion that you can identify? And now take a moment. Imagine that you are with this person in this room and just do a freeze frame. You're both going to go like frozen in time. Imagine you could bring your awareness up to the ceiling, looking down on yourself and the other person. And here you might imagine that you could call on some awakened being. It might be your sense of the Buddha, or it might be Christ, it might be a wise person in your life, someone you consider to be wise, awakened. Now imagine that you could stay on the ceiling, and this being is now going to move down into your body and will be speaking through your body with your voice. And then let the scene play out. What are the words this being offers? Now imagine going into freeze frame again and inviting this awakened being to join you on the ceiling. And you might imagine this being saying to you, completing the following phrase: "This is what you need to remember." And then letting this fall away. Perhaps this little visualization was helpful, perhaps not, but it sort of speaks to the shift that we need to make from being highly identified with our point of view to opening to a wider, vaster identity. Which brings up a really interesting question for me. What exactly is an insight? What does it mean to have an insight into what's true? Well, here's a little example, a little minor example. Let's say you're heading out the door, but you can't find your phone charger. So you just kind of forget it. You head off. You're either driving or maybe you're on public transportation. And later you go, oh, of course, I left it here. Now, on one level, you couldn't find your phone charger, and then a little bit later, you realize where you left it. And what I find in meditation practice, and particularly in meditation retreats, that we have this experience from time to time. Oh, that's where I left it. Or, oh, that's what that is. Oh, this is sadness. Oh, this is wanting. Oh, that's what I'm believing. Is that true? That's that fascinating process of awakening. Big circle, line through the circle. Above the line is what you're aware of. Below the line, everything unfelt, unseen, undigested. When you relax and pay attention, the line moves. You begin to recognize what's there. And this becomes such a fascinating process. To relax and to pay attention. To cultivate a deep desire to see more clearly, no matter what the cost. And you begin to recognize what's there. But you also get to see the attitude in the mind. What I've noticed is that whenever I have any kind of insight, whenever I have any kind of intuitive flash, There are three things that are not happening. My mind is not comparing, it's not judging, and it's not trying to figure things out. It's sort of resting in presence. And if I want to make sure I'm shutting down my capacity for intuitive insight, well, then my mind will be comparing, and it'll be judging, and it'll be trying to figure things out. So this becomes such an interesting part, not just in meditation practice, but in life. Am I comparing and judging and trying to figure things out? Or am I not comparing, not judging, and opening to possibility? It's a little bit of a bifurcation. It's either you are or you aren't. Am I comparing or am I allowing? They both play important roles. Comparing, judging, figuring stuff out is how we get success in the world. It's how we do business together. It allows us to drive cars at the same time. But there's definitely a time in our lives when cultivating non-comparing, non-judging, open allowing can begin to cultivate a greater sense of wisdom. It's a very interesting process because cultivating wisdom internally, to my mind, really has to do with this sense of cultivating presence, non-comparing, non-judging, a non-analytical quality of mind. But there's another element of cultivating wisdom which I kind of have to name, and that's kind of the power of our relationships. Being around others, finding other people who are wise, hanging out with them. Being around others who are willing to reflect back to you where you're caught. This is kind of the role of being around a really good teacher. Someone who with wisdom and compassion can provide that mirror for you. It's a role of a really good friend. I was a composition major in college. I wrote a paper I thought was really good. I got it back from the professor and he just shredded it. I had my first reaction of feeling completely unseen, hurt, offended, and then I read his comments. Wow. The clarity, the insight was so profound. That was a kind of a seminal moment for me. I've written a lot and written a lot of copy in my life, and I've really come to realize that whenever I can get that kind of feedback, the embellishment, the improvement is just remarkable. So in this relational field, it's so important to find others who also are cultivating wisdom. Also hold it as a value, that they're willing to go through the burn to see more clearly into the nature of reality, and they're willing to be in relationship with you. It's the value of spiritual friendship. And the interesting thing is, when you see more clearly, when you really see like, oh, that's what this is. I remember working with someone and he was going through a really difficult business deal. And he was trying to figure out like what was this tension he was holding, like a really, really deep tension. He had actually seen medical people around this tension he was holding inside, could not get a handle on it. And as he was trying to describe what he was feeling on the inside, I asked him to describe it to me in a way that I could recreate the same sensations. So I was really hanging out with it. And he said, wow, this is anger. So above the line, he recognized, okay, this is anger. But then I asked him kind of a clarifying question. I said, well, let's verify that word. When you go back in to what it feels like on the inside, kind of below the line, does that word resonate? And he sat with it for a little bit. And then suddenly his eyes started watering, and he said, "That's not the word." He said, "This is shame." And then he wept for a period of time. He named what was there below the line. And what that opened was compassion. When you see clearly, the other wing of practice will naturally come in. And this becomes this flowering of the two wings of practice, of wisdom and compassion. So wisdom is seeing into the nature of reality, the truth of impermanence. There's someone I know who had a real serious grudge against his brother. And as he sat with it, he was just reflecting on the relationship. And part of his recognition was that his brother was going to die, that he was too. And that recognition of impermanence, seeing his brother's suffering, seeing how shut down and how angry and how non-communicative his brother was, opened up a sense of compassion. So he reached out to him. He tried to reach out in a way that would be safe for his brother, so he actually wrote him a letter. He asked him for forgiveness. He wished him well. Now, the story doesn't have a perfect ending because his brother never responded. But this guy got to speak his mind, speak his piece. There was nothing left unsaid. His brother had no big shifts at the end of his life. Or maybe he did, but he never knew about it. But the important thing is that he took the time to see really clearly into the nature of that relationship, to see the truth of impermanence, and to recognize how his brother was going to pass as he would, which opened the floodgates of compassion. Wisdom is inextricably tied into compassion and into empathy and into sensing another person's point of view. Another short reflection. We have just a few minutes left. You might close your eyes. And if you like, you can slow down your breath. You might take a moment as you feel the breath to reflect on someone in your life that you know right now who is suffering in some way, experiencing a lot of stress. And as you deepen and slow down your breath, you might sense them through this lens of wisdom. What are the lessons that they are learning in this life? And is it possible to sense both of these lenses, this lens of wisdom, as they are finding their way to deeply integrate their life into the context of reality? And can you also sense this lens of compassion to wish them well? This delicate balance of allowing people to learn their own lessons while surrounding them and permeating them with compassion and kindness, empathy, and love. You might, in your own time, deepen your breath. If you like, you can open your eyes. How do we live in a world where we can see clearly and keep our hearts open? Seeing into the nature of karma. If you have a hard winter, there are fewer rabbits in the spring. If we look only through this lens of wisdom, it's pretty cold. It's this simple cause and effect world. If you live only in the realm of compassion, it's warm, but there's no room for wisdom. You find yourself trying to learn people's lessons for them. Finding that balance of empathy, of compassion and kindness, and allowing others to experience their own life lessons, that becomes the biggest challenge. Classic story of someone who was watching a butterfly moving from its chrysalis. It was breaking out of its cocoon, and he was watching. He thought he would help. So he helped to kind of open up the cocoon a little bit. And he realized to his horror that the butterfly wasn't fully developed. It needed to develop its self by pushing against the chrysalis. And he took away that experience. I'd like to close with a short little reflection. It's one of my favorite readings because it speaks so beautifully to what we might consider the flower of our practice, which is the awakened heart, awakened mind. If you like, you can close your eyes. You will lose everything. Your money, your power, your fame, your success, perhaps even your memories. Your looks will go. Loved ones will die. Your body will fall apart. Everything that seems permanent is impermanent and will be smashed. Experience will gradually or not so gradually strip away everything that it can strip away. Waking up means facing this reality with open eyes and no longer turning away. But right now, we stand on sacred and holy ground, for that which will be lost has not been lost. And realizing this is the key to unspeakable joy. Whoever or whatever is in your life right now has not yet been taken away from you. This may sound trivial or obvious, like nothing, but really it is the key to everything, the why and how and wherefore of existence. Impermanence has already rendered everything and everyone around you so deeply holy and significant and worthy of your heartbreaking gratitude. Loss has already transfigured your life into an altar. This, I believe, is the key. You will lose everything. But right now becomes this opportunity to live in this sense of gratitude, a sense of savoring and celebrating what is here. Thank you so much. So many blessings in your practice. Honor and a joy to be with you.